The first time I saw Johnny Mack's tin can contraption strapped to the side of his Ma Deuce, I thought the man had finally lost his mind. We were dug in outside of Bastogne, December 1944, freezing our asses off in foxholes that were more ice than earth, and here comes this farm boy from Iowa with what looked like a flattened coffee can and some wire he'd scrounged from God knows where. The thing was crude as hell, bent and twisted into this weird funnel shape, attached to the barrel jacket with nothing but determination and probably a prayer. Our platoon sergeant took one look at it and nearly had an aneurysm, but Johnny, he just grinned that gap-toothed smile of his and said 5 words that changed everything for our squad. Watch what this baby does. What happened next shouldn't have worked. By every regulation, every manual, every piece of Army doctrine we'd been taught, that homemade modification should have either done nothing or blown up in his face. Instead, when Johnny opened up on a German position 300 yards out, that Browning sang a different tune. The sound was sharper, meaner, and the impacts downrange were tighter than anything I'd seen from a 50 cal before. Dirt and snow erupted in a concentrated line instead of the usual spray pattern, and I watched German soldiers scrambling for cover like they'd kicked over a hornet's nest. Johnny fired maybe a 3-second burst, and when he stopped, there was this moment of absolute silence where every man in our platoon just stared. Then someone behind me whispered what we were all thinking. "What the hell did you just do to that gun?" I'm telling you, in 2 years of combat, I'd seen a lot of creative solutions to problems. Guys would modify their gear, their weapons, their equipment in ways that would make the brass back home have heart attacks. But this was different. This wasn't just some comfort modification or a way to carry more ammo. This farmer from Iowa, who'd probably never seen a machine gun before basic training, had somehow made the most reliable heavy machine gun in the American arsenal even deadlier. And he did it with scrap metal and farm boy ingenuity that you can't teach in any military school. What Johnny discovered that frozen morning in Belgium would spread through the front lines like wildfire. And before long, half the Ma Deuces in Europe would have some version of his tin can mod attached to them. Before I tell you exactly how Johnny's crazy modification worked and why it made such a massive difference in combat, I need to ask you something. Where are you watching this from right now? Are you in Texas? Maybe you're up in Michigan. Could be you're out in California, down in Florida, or somewhere I'd never even guess. Drop your city in the comments down below because I really want to know who's hearing this story and where you're from. And listen, while you're down there in the comments, smash that like button if this story about American ingenuity and firepower is getting to you. Show the algorithm you want more real combat stories like this. And if you haven't subscribed to this channel yet, what are you waiting for? We've got incredible stories coming out all the time. Stories about the weapons that won the war, stories about the men who fought, stories that'll absolutely blow your mind. Subscribe right now and turn on that notification bell so you never miss a new video. All right, let me tell you how a coffee can became a game changer. Johnny Mack wasn't your typical soldier. Most of us city boys, we knew guns from basic training and whatever hunting our dads might have done. But Johnny, he grew up on a farm outside of Cedar Rapids, and that man could fix anything with whatever he had lying around. I'd seen him repair a Jeep carburetor using a piece of tin from a ration can and some wire, watched him jury-rig a broken radio with parts from a busted flashlight. The guy had this natural understanding of how things worked, like he could see the mechanics of the universe in ways the rest of us couldn't. So when he started fiddling with his Ma Deuce, I should have known something interesting was coming. The problem he was trying to solve was one every machine gunner dealt with. The Browning M2 50 cal was an absolute beast of a weapon. Reliable as sunrise, powerful enough to punch through light armor, and with a range that could reach out and touch someone at over a mile if you knew what you were doing. But it had this characteristic that drove gunners crazy. The barrel would heat up during sustained fire, and as it heated, the accuracy would wander. Not a lot, but enough that your cone of fire would spread out, especially at longer ranges. For suppressive fire, that was fine. But when you needed precision, when you had a specific target that absolutely had to be neutralized, that spread could be the difference between mission success and mission failure. Johnny had been thinking about this problem for weeks. He'd grown up watching his dad work on farm equipment, fixing tractors and combines, and one thing his old man had taught him was that heat management was everything. Control the heat, control the machine. So Johnny started experimenting. He tried different ways of cooling the barrel faster, different methods of directing airflow, different configurations of scrap metal attached in various places. Most of them did nothing. A few actually made things worse. But then he found a discarded coffee can, the big kind that came in supply drops, and something clicked in his farm boy brain. He spent an entire night in our foxhole, using his trench knife to cut and shape that tin, bending it with his bare hands, testing different angles and configurations. By morning he had his prototype. The modification itself was deceptively simple, which is probably why it worked so well. Johnny had cut the coffee can lengthwise and flattened it out, then shaped it into this elongated funnel or shroud that ran along the right side of the barrel, just forward of the receiver. He'd punched holes in it at specific intervals, creating what basically amounted to a directional air scoop. The idea was brilliant in its simplicity. As the gun fired and the barrel heated up, the natural recoil and movement of the weapon would force air through those holes and along the barrel in a specific pattern. It wasn't just passive cooling. It was active, directed airflow that would pull heat away from the barrel faster and more efficiently than just letting it radiate naturally into the air. But here's where Johnny's farming background really showed. He didn't just slap it on randomly. He'd positioned it so that the airflow would also counteract the natural thermal drift of the barrel. See, when a gun barrel heats up, it doesn't heat evenly. The top gets hotter than the bottom because hot air rises, and that uneven heating causes the barrel to warp slightly, which is part of what causes accuracy to degrade. Johnny's tin can shroud directed cool air specifically to the areas that heated up fastest, keeping the thermal distribution more even. It was the kind of intuitive engineering you can't learn from a textbook. You have to grow up solving problems with whatever you have on hand to develop that kind of thinking. The other guys in the platoon thought he was nuts at first. Our sergeant, a career army man from Kentucky named Davidson, he was particularly skeptical. Told Johnny that modifying military equipment was against regulations and could get him in serious trouble. But Johnny had this way of explaining things that made sense, even when they sounded crazy. He compared it to how you'd modify a tractor exhaust to improve engine performance, or how you'd redirect airflow in a barn to keep livestock cooler in summer. Davidson still wasn't convinced, but he agreed to let Johnny test it on one condition. If it didn't work or if it damaged the gun in any way, Johnny would be on latrine duty for a month. Johnny just grinned and said, "Deal." That first test firing was something I'll never forget. We set up at our defensive position just after dawn, the kind of grey, miserable December morning where the cold seeps into your bones and makes everything harder. Johnny had his modified Ma Deuce mounted on a position overlooking a small valley where we'd been taking sporadic fire from German positions. We had a clear field of fire out to about 500 yards, and Davidson had marked off several targets at different ranges for Johnny to engage. Standard accuracy test, nothing fancy. Fire a burst, assess the pattern, fire another burst, compare results. Johnny's first burst was at a destroyed farm building 300 yards out. The sound was noticeably different. Instead of the normal deep thumping rhythm of a Ma Deuce, there was this sharper crack to it, almost like the sound was being focused somehow. The impacts on target were tight, real tight. Where a normal 50 cal might have spread rounds across a 6-foot circle at that range, Johnny's rounds were grouped in maybe 2 feet. Davidson's eyebrows went up, but he didn't say anything. Could be luck, could be coincidence. So he called for another burst, this time at 400 yards. Same result. The grouping was tighter than any of us had seen from a Browning at that distance. By the third burst at 500 yards, we were all believers. Johnny wasn't just getting lucky. His tin can modification was actually working, and working better than any of us had imagined. The gun was staying cooler. You could actually feel the difference when you put your hand near the barrel, and the accuracy was holding up through sustained fire in a way we'd never seen before. Davidson stood there for a long moment, just staring at that modified weapon, and then he did something I'd never seen him do before. He apologized to a private, told Johnny he'd been wrong to doubt him, and asked if he could make more of those shrouds for the other guns in the platoon. Word spread fast in combat. By that afternoon, we had 3 other gun crews asking Johnny to modify their weapons. By the next day, guys from other platoons were coming by to see this miracle modification. Within a week, half the heavy weapons company had some version of Johnny's tin can shroud on their Ma Deuces. The real proof of Johnny's modification came during the German counteroffensive that everyone now calls the Battle of the Bulge. We were holding a position outside a small Belgian town, and the Germans came at us in force. Panzers, infantry, the works. They were pushing hard, trying to break through our lines, and every gun we had was in action. The Ma Deuces were absolutely critical because they were the only weapons we had that could reliably stop light armor and really reach out to hit targets at distance. I was feeding ammunition to Johnny that day, and I got to see his modification in action under real combat conditions. We were firing almost continuously for hours, and that barrel should have been glowing cherry red. Should have been so hot that accuracy went completely to hell. But Johnny's tin can shroud was doing its job. The barrel was hot, don't get me wrong, but it wasn't overheating the way an unmodified gun would have, and more importantly, the accuracy was holding. At ranges where other guns were just throwing out suppressive fire and hoping for hits, Johnny was making precision shots. I watched him take out the vision ports on a Panzer at 400 yards. Saw him drop German infantry at distances that should have been impossible for sustained fire. The other modified guns in our company were performing just as well. Everywhere you looked, you'd see these crude tin can shrouds attached to Brownings, and every one of them was outperforming the standard configuration. The Germans had to have noticed, had to have wondered why our heavy machine gun fire was suddenly so much more effective. They probably never figured out that it was because a farm boy from Iowa had taken their coffee cans and turned them into tactical advantages. By the end of that battle, Johnny's modification wasn't just accepted, it was celebrated. Company commanders were actively encouraging their machine gunners to make similar modifications. The army brass, when they eventually caught wind of what was happening, they tried to shut it down at first. Against regulations, unauthorized modifications, all that bureaucratic nonsense. But the combat reports didn't lie. Units with modified Ma Deuces were performing measurably better than units without them. Eventually, some smart officer up the chain realized that maybe, just maybe, they should be documenting this field innovation instead of trying to suppress it. What made Johnny's modification so effective wasn't just the cooling and accuracy improvements. It was the fact that it could be made with literally anything. Guys weren't limited to coffee cans. They used ration tins, pieces of aircraft aluminum from crashed planes, sheet metal from damaged vehicles, even German equipment they'd captured. The basic principle was simple enough that any reasonably handy soldier could replicate it, and each gunner could customize it slightly for their specific weapon and fighting style. Some guys made longer shrouds for maximum cooling. Others made shorter, more compact versions that were easier to move through dense terrain. A few creative souls even started adding camouflage or painting them to match their surroundings. The modification spread beyond just our unit, beyond even our division. It moved through the entire front line like a virus, in the best possible way. Soldiers talked to each other, especially about things that keep them alive, and word of Johnny's tin can mod traveled fast. By the time we pushed into Germany in early 1945, I'd estimate that maybe 70 or 80% of the Ma Deuces on the Western Front had some variation of it. The Pacific Theatre picked it up too, though I heard they used different materials, bamboo and native metals, adapted to what they had available. Years later, after the war, I learned that military engineers actually studied Johnny's modification. They brought him in, asked him to explain his thinking, documented the whole thing. Some of that research eventually influenced post-war machine gun design, particularly in terms of barrel cooling systems and heat management. The modern quick-change barrel system that became standard on military machine guns, that owes something to observations made about field modifications like Johnny's. The official military historians never gave him proper credit, of course. It's all documented as unnamed field innovations or soldier ingenuity in the abstract. But those of us who were there, we knew. We knew it was a farmer from Iowa who looked at a coffee can and saw a way to make the best heavy machine gun in the world even better. Johnny didn't make it home. He was killed in March 1945, just a few weeks before the war in Europe ended. Sniper got him during a routine patrol near the Rhine. I think about him sometimes, about how his simple modification probably saved dozens, maybe hundreds of lives by making our defensive positions more effective. The thing about war is that it brings out extremes in people. Extreme courage, extreme fear, extreme ingenuity. Johnny Mack's tin can modification represents something fundamental about the American way of fighting. We don't just follow the manual. We adapt, we improvise, we make things better with whatever we have on hand. That spirit, that refusal to accept that the issued equipment is the final word, that's won more battles than most people realize. I kept one of Johnny's original tin can shrouds after the war. It's hanging in my garage now, rusty and dented, barely recognizable for what it is. But every time I look at it, I remember a farm boy who saw a problem, grabbed a coffee can, and made history with his bare hands and a trench knife. They gave out medals for a lot of things during that war. They should have given one to Johnny for that modification. It was worth more in practical combat value than a lot of the things that did earn recognition. But Johnny never cared about medals anyway. He just wanted to get the job done, get home to Iowa, and get back to farming. Sometimes the real heroes never get the recognition they deserve, but their innovations live on forever.